Hi everybody, welcome to the Parallel Systems broadcast. I'm your host Mike, and in today's episode we are going to be talking about hyperinflations, and I'm going to be laying out the path to hyperinflation using data. So you'll know that in my recent video I was showing how central banks are insolvent, and over the past 8 months or so on this channel I have been charting the path to hyperinflation and the death of fiat money, and I've laid it all out very clearly. I've showed you all of the red flags. I've talked about historical examples. I've showed you Exeter's pyramid many times, and I've discussed what's happening in the economy. However, there are still some people out there that say you are lying, this is clickbait, they're going to ride this one out. Well, I think those people are absolutely insane. They do not know their financial and monetary history, and they have no clue what is going on. However, just for those people, and also so that you at home can get a really good understanding of just how dire the situation is, I'm making this special video all about hyperinflations, because most people have no clue what has happened historically, and they cannot see past this thing on their face called their own nose. And the reason people think like this is because they have something called recency bias. They think that tomorrow is going to look like today and yesterday, particularly if you're in the West. If people have lived in countries like Great Britain or the US, then they have massive recency bias because they lived during the good times. But if you go to Eastern Europe or Central Europe, where people have lived with hyperinflations many times, some as recent as in the past 30 years, trust me, they do not have recency bias, and they do not trust their governments very much. As you'll know, they had very low rates of the you-know-what. This is because they are wise to the world. However, in the West, we have become lazy and we have become decadent. Now, first and foremost, let's look at the screen in front of you. This is Modern Hyperinflation Cycles. Now, this was a working paper from the IMF analyzing hyperinflations in the modern era. So we're talking about hyperinflations that happened over the past 30 or 40 years. Now, they use some very specific criteria for this. I'm not going to go into it all. You can read the paper yourself. Today, we're just going to be analyzing some key parts of it. So take a look in front of you, and you can see that there are 19 examples listed here. Lots of them are in Latin America. There's a few in Europe. You can see we've got Poland there, Croatia, Bulgaria, Ukraine. And of course, we've got some of the bigger countries, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. Yes, they love a good hyperinflation over in Argentina. And you can see what it shows you here is the duration of phase one. Now, phase one in the working paper is defined as when inflation exceeds 50%. And they call this the build-up stage. So this is not the hyperinflation stage yet, but it is the build-up stage. So this is what happens en route to the hyperinflation. Once you get over 50% inflation, you are en route to the hyperinflationary stage, which is classed in this working paper as over 500%. So 100%, no, it's even higher. It's not 100, it's not 2, it's 500% or more. But just imagine living with 100% inflation or 200%. Well, that's what's happening in some countries right now, like Lebanon and Turkey. They are already on the road to hyperinflation, but they're not there yet, because these things can play out over a long period of time. However, I do not think the hyperinflations that are coming for us are going to play out over a long period of time. I think they're going to happen very quickly. They're going to be very brutal, and they're going to be over and done with within a few years. And I'll explain why later in the show. But let's just take a quick look at this one in front of us. You can see that most of these hyperinflations took between 1 and the maximum was 15 years. In the Congo, they had an awfully long build-up. You can see that in Poland there, it was 8 years. So that was 8 years of really high inflation with an average inflation of 63%. So people were living with 63% for 8 years. And let's just point out some more. So you can see if we go to Brazil here, it took 7 years for them, and they had average annual inflation of 162%. 162% in Brazil for 7 long years. Now remember, this was before the hyperinflation. So this was just the build-up. So it's important to know. Now, some statistics from this, just to give you an idea of how this works out. Once you are over the 50% threshold, it is very unlikely, less than 50%, that you are going to get out of it and that you're going to go back beneath 50. In fact, it's 33.6%. That's your chances of getting beneath it. So most likely, once you're over 50%, you're in the red and you're en route to hyperinflation. Now, the average duration during this first phase in table 3 in front of you is 8 to 9 years with an annual average inflation of 125%. Now, let's just contrast that with where we are today. So you can see this is the UK. This is a breakdown of the rising cost of living. So let's just look at how inflation is working just between 2021 and 2022. And you can see we've got things like domestic fuel doubling in price. So that's 100% or plus 100% inflation just in fuel alone. If you look at things like, for example, social and cultural participation, so this would be going out for a meal, going out to restaurants, then again, your significant increases there. You've got £44 to £64. So what's that? That's a 50% increase. Yes, we're already at the 50% rate there. We're at 100% in fuel. Of course, if you look at energy costs for many people, that's in the 70, 80% range. So no matter what the government tells you right now, you've got to remember their inflation statistics have been messed with time and time again. And if you look at the US statistics and go to shadow stats, you'll find this out. Now, I've done my own calculations on the true figures in the UK, and really we are close to 40% inflation. Yes, 40%. And like I said, 50% is the threshold, and once you are past 50%, you are likely to go on to a hyperinflation. So I just wanted to point all that out to you. Now let's go back to our charts. Phase number 2 is the hyperinflation stage. So this is the one that gets all the headlines. This is what you see all the stories about. It's the hyperinflation. But like I said, you've got to understand they always have a build-up too. We are in the build-up now, and that's what you need to recognize. So let's just have a look at some of the key countries again. I'll just pick some at random actually. So let's go back to Poland, 1990 to 1990. Now that's really interesting. It lasted a single year in Poland, a single year, and the average annual inflation, it was 555%. So it was one that had just made it over that 500% threshold that they were using to calculate a hyperinflation in this working paper. One single year of brutal 555%. However, remember, they had a long build up and one big blow off top with 555%, and then it was done. Then it was over. Then they went to stage 3, which we're going to come to in a second. And I think ours is going to be like this. It's going to be very quick, very brutal, and then the currencies are going to collapse and we're going to go into something like the CBDC. Or if they are not ready, we'll go to an interim period where we just have this chaotic period where they're just using gold between central banks. They'll probably create some currencies at home for people to use, maybe an electronic one, maybe a digital token, and that will be the setup for CBDCs. Let's have a look at some others. So let's go to Ukraine, a very popular country right now. 1993 to 1994, it was 2 years. Average annual inflation, 2,813%. Wow, that's a whopper, but it's not the biggest one on there. The largest one on there is a famous one. It's the Zimbabwe hyperinflation, and this one lasted 3 years, 8,683% for average annual inflation. So again, absolutely huge, and you'll have seen these Zimbabwean banknotes. You can get $1 trillion banknotes for the Zimbabwe, and you'll notice that I sometimes put up on my videos the starving billionaires, my friend Tito and Emmanuel, and they lift up their sign with all of the notes stuck on it. So this is what the hyperinflation stage looks like. So much shorter, you have a longer build-up, but then the actual hyperinflation stage is much shorter. So average duration, 3 to 4 years. Average annual inflation, 2,912%. 2,912%. Now, the longest episode here was Argentina and Brazil of around 7 years, followed by Nicaragua, and the shortest that you can see on there was Poland in 1990 and Russia in 1993. Both took a single year, and it was over and done with. Short, sharp shock. Okay, so let's move on to looking at the macro fundamentals that we should be looking out for in terms of hyperinflation. So this is based on the analysis of all of those hyperinflations I just showed you on that chart previously, so all 19 of them. And what they looked at was some specific metrics to try and figure out a pattern that could be used to figure out if a country is heading towards hyperinflation. And they looked at things like fiscal balance. So this is the country spending more than it actually brings in? So is it in deficit or is it in surplus? The base money growth, so this is the amount of money that is being printed, essentially. That is all it is, the amount of money that is being printed. How much does that change year on year going into a hyperinflation? Tax revenues and central government debt, so debt to GDP. And it looked at this across all 4 stages. So we looked at stage 1, which was the acceleration over 50% inflation. Phase 2, which is the hyperinflation. Phase 3, which is the disinflation stage where it's coming down. And then phase 4, where it's stabilizing again. So what we're going to look at, and we're going to focus mainly on the phase 1, because that's where we are right now, or that's where we might be. We're looking at going into this phase 1 acceleration en route to the hyperinflation. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And we're going to try and figure out if Europe, the US, and the UK are heading towards hyperinflation. So first and foremost, fiscal balance. And you can see that in phase 1, when we analyze all of these past hyperinflations, there is a pattern, and the average fiscal balance is minus 3.2%. So that means that governments are spending 3.2% more than they are bringing in revenue from taxes and other costs. So let's just have a look at where we stand globally in terms of fiscal balance. We're going to begin here in the United Kingdom, and you can see we are minus 5.7%, minus 5.7%. So we have a huge fiscal deficit in the UK. Like I said, here on the chart, 3.2% was the average. Well, we're already beyond that. That means we're in an even worse situation than this one. Let's go back and let's now have a look at Europe. You can see Europe fiscal deficit 5.1%. 5.1%. So again, it's even worse than in these past hyperinflations on average, what it takes to trigger a hyperinflation. Okay, let's go back to this graphic here and let's look at the next one. Now, this one is key. In fact, this one is the most important part of a hyperinflation. This is the single biggest trigger of a hyperinflation. We know throughout history, it's the rise in base money. So this is when they start to print lots and lots of money, because essentially that's what a hyperinflation is. You can forget all the other metrics. If you just printed lots and lots of money, you would have a hyperinflation. But of course, the other metrics are important for recognizing if we're heading towards a hyperinflation, because the printing of money usually needs a trigger. There needs to be something happening in the economy, some weakness, some problem. If we go back to Weimar Germany, the reason they printed money is because they had lots and lots of debt. They had to pay war reparations and all other kinds of debts, and they didn't have the money, so they started printing it instead. So there was a trigger there. There's other triggers throughout history too, such as during revolutionary France, when they had trade deficits. They were losing revenue. So again, fiscal balance was important, and they started to print lots and lots of money to try and compensate for it. So we can't just look at base money by itself, but it is the single biggest telltale sign that we're heading into a hyperinflation. So let's see. Base money change, 52.6% was the average. So some below, some probably more. So let's have a look now at base money change in the previous few years in the countries of the United Kingdom, Europe, and the US. So here's the UK, money supply, M2, and you can see that over the past 10 years or so, we have seen a doubling almost of the money supply. So we're up about 70-80% here. So 2014, we was around 2 on this chart. I'm not going to say the full numbers. And now we're around 3.2. So that is a significant increase. And you can see there was a huge jump from 2020 to today. That was the massive leap there. Now we also have to consider what's happening right now. Are they cutting back on spending in the UK? Absolutely not. They're printing money for energy costs. They're printing money for migration and all other kinds of nonsense that they are essentially forcing upon people. No one's asking for this. Let's go back to this chart here. Now let's have a look at the US M2 money supply, and you can see there was a massive rapid escalation, 40% year on year change from 2020 to 2021. That is huge. And as we know, 40% of all the dollars that are in existence came into existence after 2020. So the US has been printing money like there is no tomorrow. And of course, if we go back to our image, yes, we are entering this stage here, the acceleration. There is very clear evidence of that. And let's go to Europe, our final one. Look at the green one here. Again, this is M2. And if you look from 2015 to 2022, and you can see that it's gone up over 50%. That's over 5 years. However, again, if you go to 2020 to 2021, 2022, you can see it accelerated substantially. So not quite as much as in the US or the UK, but it was close. Okay, let's go back to our graphic then. Let's look at the next one. Now, tax revenues, I'm not going to go into that one just yet, but I will say this, we're going to see a substantial reduction in tax revenues in the coming years because people are starting to get laid off. German industry is collapsing and we're going into huge recession, if not Great Depression. The UK is already predicting a massive recession. In fact, it's already in it. It's already in it, but it's not going to tell you that just yet. It's going to wait until the bitter end. So we're going to see huge layoffs, lots and lots of job loss. Tax revenues are going to go down substantially. And you can see in phase one, it's minus 2.4% percentage change in tax revenues to GDP. So expect to see that. You can look out for that one. That one's not quite as important. So as you can see from that previous segment, the extraordinary increase in base money growth is absolutely key. That is a fact in all hyperinflations. It cannot happen. You cannot have a hyperinflation without a significant increase in base money growth. So it's important to understand that that is the one that you need to be really aware of. However, all of the other ones bleed into that. They are the triggers for that money printing. Okay, let's go on to the next bit. Now, this one's really important. This is external variables. So these are other things that can influence the road to hyperinflation. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. There's lots of them here. Like I said, you can read this document yourself, but there are some key ones. Now, the ones that I want to draw your attention to here is the top one. So you can see the VIX index. Now, this is the index of stock market volatility. And a lot of people might assume that during the build up to a hyperinflation, there will be significant volatility in the stock market. Well, not quite. That's not actually the case. It could happen or it could not. You can see here that in the acceleration phase, remember this has analyzed all of the previous incidences of hyperinflation, there was not a significant amount of volatility. The average was 0.2. So this shows you there is no correlation to the stock market leading to hyperinflation. It could happen or it could not. So that's important to know. And the next really important one that I want to point out is the United States real interest rate. And you can see it's 2.8% increase during the acceleration phase. So again, this is something that could be a contributor, a trigger mechanism for hyperinflations in other countries. And remember that list of 19 countries I showed you at the start, none of them were the US. The US has not had a hyperinflation. But what they were influenced by was the US increasing its real interest rate. And why is that? Well, of course, it's because the US is the global reserve currency. In the modern era, it has always been the global reserve. And when the US increased their real interest rate, this has a substantial impact on other countries, particularly emerging markets. And a lot of those countries were emerging markets. There was Poland, there was all kinds of countries on there. Argentina, Zimbabwe, Brazil, Chile, they were all included. So, of course, if the US is raising their real interest rate, it has a substantial impact on those countries if they have to pay back dollar denominated debt, and lots of them have a lot of dollar denominated debt. So if the dollar is becoming stronger vis-a-vis their currency, it means they have to pay back more. It costs them more. Of course, if the US is raising their real interest rate, it also sucks money out of other countries because other investors will start to flock to the US, so they'll pull their money out of all these other countries, and that can trigger a financial crisis. Also, there's not enough capital at home to invest in business. It's all gone to the US. That is exactly what is happening right now. So again, it's another big red flag that we are ticking the right boxes to show that we are potentially on the way to hyperinflation. Now, the only difference here is it's not just emerging markets. We're talking about the entire Eurozone that are ticking the boxes. Great Britain is ticking the box. And the big one, the US itself, is now ticking boxes. So, of course, this one doesn't make a difference to the US in terms of their real interest rate. That's not going to cause a hyperinflation in their country. But they're ticking all the other boxes too. So we're in a global financial crisis. And the big thing about this one is everything's so interconnected, everything's so interwoven that it really doesn't matter where the crisis starts. It will bring everyone down together. Okay, on to the next one. So this is the real and financial variables, and we've already looked at some of these metrics. We looked at GDP growth, and we already established that we are already above the threshold on that one. We have not spoke about real consumption, so that's an interesting one. So this is a sharp decline in consumption during the acceleration phase, minus 2.9%. We're seeing it everywhere. People are going out less, they're filling up their cars less, they're going to the restaurants less, they're going out for coffees less. People are starting to feel the pinch now, and that's because inflation is here. So real consumption is almost certainly down, and I would anticipate we've already gone past that 2.9% threshold on that one. Now, it's interesting if you just go to the side on that one, to the next one, the hyperinflation stage, you can see that goes down dramatically during the hyperinflation. This is when people are being really impoverished, and you can see there 10.5%, minus 10.5%. So that's what you need to expect. During the hyperinflation, nobody will be going out. They won't be able to afford to. They're going to be getting wrecked. Now, here's another really important one, and that is bank credit to the private sector as a percentage of GDP. And you can see during the acceleration phase, the rise, that is minus 11%. Now, this is really important because what's happening right now, liquidity is being pulled from the markets. And this is leading to the deflation of the asset price bubbles. The stock market is crashing. The housing market is crashing. Cryptocurrencies, they're out the window. They're crashing. Once we have Credit Suisse or another major European bank collapse, once German industry is fully imploded, once we have something like another derivatives blow up like what happened in the UK with the pensions and the LDI crisis, once one of these triggers is pulled, that is going to lead to the next round of money printing. And then we get into that hyperinflation stage. That's when inflation really takes off. And remember, it takes about 6 months to a year for the inflation to feed through to the system after increasing base money. That's what happened. We increased base money in 2020, but the inflation came in 2021. And then even more so in 2022. Well, the same thing's going to be happening again, only this time it's going to be even more accelerated. So that's what's going to happen. So we're not there yet, but we are entering that stage, and all of the metrics are lining up. All we're waiting for now is the trigger. And when that trigger is pulled, then we see the next round of money printing with base money going up. We're going to see it rise rapidly. Okay, on to the next one. And this one's a really important one because this helps us to visualize the consequences of hyperinflation. And this is something that we are talking about a lot over here on Parallel Systems. We are preparing ourselves physically and psychologically for the coming chaos, because that is what happens in a hyperinflation. The whole of society descends into chaos. And if you look at this chart here, you can see that because they have measured it across all of these different hyperinflations. They have looked at key things like economic freedom, government expenditure, labor freedom, monetary freedom, trade freedom. They've looked at things like military in politics, government stability, religious tensions, internal and external conflict, and they've measured it through different phases of the hyperinflation. So of course we know we're in phase one, so we're already starting to see some of these metrics trigger warning signs. So let's go to the bottom first. If you go up 3 from the bottom, you can see internal conflict starts to increase minus 2.5, that means we're having more conflict if we're going into the minus. Minus 2.5, that means we're seeing a significant increase in internal conflict during the acceleration phase. Now, we know that is exactly what's happened. Just look at the past few years. We've never had such tensions between left and right, racial tensions that are being stoked up by the establishment, all of these crazy ideologies that push lies and nonsense onto people and they make them really angry. That's happening. I've never seen internal conflict like this in the West in my life. External conflict, well, we've got plenty of that. We've got a war going on in the Ukraine. We've got a proxy war. It's all going crazy over there. Lots of external conflict. Minus 1.5, that means external conflict increases during the acceleration phase, and we can see that. But what's really interesting is if you look at internal conflict and you go from the phase 1 to phase 2, the hyperinflation, you see it goes up massively. It goes from minus 2.5 to minus 4. That means you have huge internal conflict during the hyperinflation. However, external conflict is just as bad from phase 1 to phase 2, but there isn't an increase. It's just as bad. Now, really interesting is military in politics. You are much more likely to have military in politics during a hyperinflation. So this is something that people need to know. People are likely to vote in strongmen. They may vote in somebody who enacts martial law. Because remember, there's going to be a lot of chaos, and they've put a lot of strange citizens across the UK and other countries. Those people are going to be very angry too. And you know who they're going to be picking on? Well, it's not going to be each other, is it? They're going to be looting, robbing, rioting, and probably lots of other things too. So the chances of martial law are very high. And people will vote that in because they will be terrified. They'll be scared. They'll want somebody to save them because they were not prepared. They didn't have a food store. They don't know much about taking care of their family in times of crisis because they had it easy for too long. Those people are going to be vulnerable. And they're going to be very scared of those strange men on the street that came across to the country very recently, along with all the other people that are out there rioting and looting. So they're going to vote in all kinds of tyrants, military dictators. You can expect this. Strong men are going to come back. They're already coming back. The next one above, government stability. It goes from minus 2 in the phase 1 acceleration to minus 4 in the hyperinflation. Now, do we have a stable government in Europe? No, we don't. Same in the UK. How many prime ministers have we had in the UK in the past 2 years? I've lost count. Lost count of whether it's male, female, who knows anymore? We don't know who's in there. We don't care. They're all puppets. But we are seeing huge instability in governments. Well, this only gets worse. This only gets worse as we go into a hyperinflation. It goes from minus 2 to minus 4. Not good. Rule of law, minus 1 to minus 2. So it's already getting bad. Yes, we're seeing that. We're seeing the crooks all over the place, most of them in governments. But we're also going to see rule of law start to break down in a hyperinflation. Remember, this has been studied across 19 previous instances of hyperinflation. Other things on this list, property rights. Property rights start to go down, but they do not go down more once you get to the hyperinflation. So it stays level across that. Economic freedom gets worse. I think we're going to see capital controls. We're going to see people locked down because when they're hyperinflating those currencies, you're going to have lots of angry people. Their bank accounts, no money's going to come out of there because those banks are going to keep those deposits to bail themselves in. Then people are going to find out that their money's gone. They've got no money left. It's gone. The banks took it. And even if they did have it, what use would it be? It's hyperinflating. You could have £50,000 one day. The next day, it won't buy you a loaf of bread. That's what a hyperinflation is. Of course, they're going to try and lock people down within their country so they don't try and flee abroad with their capital. That's capital controls, and they've got the mechanism for that. It's called a lockdown. Yes, we've already seen it. So I expect to see economic freedom decrease substantially. Another important one there, and this one's particularly important for people in the West, and that's ethnic tensions. That gets worse during a hyperinflation. This is something we've been speaking about a lot on my channel. We've been speaking about location. If you want to get out of Dodge whilst you still can, and time is running out. But if you do, where do you go? You want to be somewhere where you're not going to be subjected to ethnic tensions, and that's very hard right now, particularly in Europe where you've got multicultural utopias. Well, we're seeing them quickly turn into dystopias. Crime is going through the roof, and ethnic tensions are massive. If you look to the UK right now, you had Hindus and Pakistanis warring in the streets.
This is what happens when simmering tensions boil over. On Saturday night, a Hindu march in Leicester led to clashes with Muslims. Bottles were thrown at police as they tried to stop the violence.
I'm saying this directly to all the so-called Hindutva wannabe gangsters. Don't ever come out like that again. Do you understand? No chance. Are they going to come out like that again? Never. Are they going to come out like that again? Never. Because if they do come out, are we going to be here, yes or no?
You had Iranians battling the police in London. All kinds of crazy tensions and warfare is breaking out in countries that have pursued multiculturalism. Now that's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse, and the UK is also having massive amounts of migration right now. Lots and lots of young men coming in, being put up in hotels up and down the country. Well, I can guarantee that's going to feed into this too, as I've already mentioned. So one more thing that I wanted to mention is that in 18 of 19 of the previous hyperinflations, they all ended with one key element. So after the hyperinflation, after all of the chaos and madness, the destruction of wealth, the looting, rioting, the misery, the despair, they all ended with one thing. Bailouts from the IMF. 18 out of 19 of the ones that we discussed today ended with a bailout from the IMF. So let's just imagine you wanted to bring in a one world currency, a CBDC, one CBDC to rule them all. A new monetary system. A great financial reset. How would you do it? Well, first and foremost, you need to get rid of the current debt burden. Over 300 trillion in debt, over 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities, 2 to 4 quadrillion in derivatives, an absolute shit show. You need to get rid of all of that. And to do that, you're going to bring down the current system and wipe it out. And you're going to wipe it out through the hyperinflation. You could do it through a deflation, but probably not. That's just going to destroy the currency in another way. You're probably going to do it through the hyperinflation because it's the easiest way. It's the one you have most control over. So you're going to hyperinflate the currencies. And then that's going to force people into a period of chaos. And that's the one that I just described. All of this madness going on, leading to all kinds of chaos in society. People will be very scared and they'll be clamoring for somebody to save them. They might vote in a military dictator. They might vote in a strong man or a strong woman. We're seeing lots of those around and I don't like the look of them either. That's probably what's going to happen. However, then you're going to have a central authority have to step in because the governments are bankrupt. The central banks, yes, they're going to be bankrupt too. And of course, at that point, the central banks will go to the currency of last resort. And that is, of course, gold. They're going to start to use gold to enact trade with one another. And they may even create an interim currency that is backed by gold, just to survive, because we're going to be going through a period of chaos. But then you're going to have a new monetary order begin. A great financial reset will be enacted. All of the old system will be gone, and then we get to the new Bretton Woods moment where everybody comes together and decides what is the next system. And the IMF or some other centralized power, that is where it's going to happen. Those are going to be the ones that come in and say, right, we're going to issue a new reserve asset, a new CBDC, a new electronic token. It's going to be backed by X, Y, or Z. Maybe gold, maybe commodities, probably a mixture of the two. So to do that, get rid of the old system and then you centralize power. That's how we quickly get to centralized power. That's how we quickly get to CBDCs. So to finish with today, I'm going to show you this chart in front of me. This is the hyperinflation of France between 1791 and 1796. And this is just a reminder that nothing new under the sun, nothing new under the sun. We've been here before many, many times. Thousands and thousands of fiat currencies have come and gone. They always go to their intrinsic value, which is zero, and you can see the chart of that here. So what makes you think this is going to be any different? Do you think we've transcended history? Do you really think we've transcended history? Have you looked around? What do you see? You see the same things we have always seen throughout every single era of history. Every single civilization, we're seeing war enacted. We're seeing corrupt politicians. We're seeing money printing, currency debasement. We're seeing internal strife, external strife. We're seeing propaganda en masse. We're seeing lies everywhere coming from all sources. We're seeing the destruction of human dignity, the loss of freedoms. These things happen all the time. They've happened many times before and they'll happen again. So have we transcended history? Now, I'm absolutely sure that everyone who watches my channel regularly understands all of this information already. They already understand it, and I'm sure they enjoyed this video. It was useful, but they probably didn't even need to know this information because they just look around them. They've got their critical thought still. However, like I said, there's many people out there who have recency bias. They don't know their history. They've not seen charts like this in front of me. They don't know what Weimar Germany is. Or they simply think that they've transcended history, like I just said. This is foolish. Now, those people have victim written all over them. Those people are the saps that are going to get taken for everything. They're going to come out of this with absolutely nothing at the end. And maybe they deserve it, particularly those ones that have been exposed to information like this and they've disregarded it. Let them take whatever path they want. Make your bed and lie in it. However, for the people out there that are still thinking critically, that still have that portion of their brain that enables them to think critically, they haven't handed it over to Big Brother and the government. To those people, I would say make sure you are getting yourselves prepared. Make sure you are telling your family to watch videos like this. Please share it with them. This video may be the one that wakes them up to the fact that everything is not well. Everything is not well, that we are entering some really dangerous times, not just financially, but socially also. Now, of course, if you want to get prepared for this properly, then you can check out my Patreon page where I share articles, information, and a newsletter all about getting prepared. And this is about practical preparation. This is about keeping yourself physically and financially secure throughout the coming crisis and ensuring that you and your family make it to the other side. We've also got a fantastic Telegram group over there where we share collective information and intel about what is happening to keep ourselves aware and to ensure that we all make it through with a good community leading the way. So if you enjoy the channel and you enjoy the content, if you enjoy the live streams particularly, then you will definitely enjoy the Patreon page and the podcasts that I produce, especially for my patrons. These are private podcasts where we go into things in much more detail. We talk about finance, we talk about mindset and psychology, and all different aspects of getting prepared. We also talk about how we can keep ourselves practically prepared in terms of food, water, energy, and of course security. So if those things interest you and you want to get prepared and you want to take yourself to the next level, then check me out over there. We also have the private Telegram group, of course, that you can join to interact with other Parallel Systems broadcast community members. So a big shout out to everyone over there on my Patreon Parallel Systems broadcast community. Thank you for supporting me. Also, thank you to those people that have donated through things like cryptocurrency and buy me a coffee. I much appreciate that. That really helps keep this channel up and running. And of course, thank you to my legion of followers on YouTube. And I've had some donations recently from David and I2. Sorry, I2, I don't know your first name, but thank you for donating recently in the live chat. Again, all of those things are much appreciated. I do put a lot of time and effort into this podcast and into keeping this message going, trying to keep people aware, trying to get people protected, because that is what it's all about. So thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.